Another observation: we have three coaches right at 9 million. Two of them are 71%, but our friend Coach Drinkwitz at Missouri is only at 61%.
Yeah, and I that one stood out to me as well. It makes me wonder, does that have to do with Missouri fans aren't going to like this take?
Have you ever noticed how once college football, the Super Bowl is over, the NFL's done, that somehow, some way, college basketball begins to heat up?
It really is incredible.
It's like a natural phenomenon. I mean,
I
it's
agree completely. It's like football's over. Oh, here's a bunch of upsets. You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm sure if we delved into quantum physics, we could explain this phenomenon, but every year
Yeah,
it's like clockwork.
without fail. Absolutely.
We have a big week coming up this week, Darren.
Yes.
College basketball, men's basketball, women's basketball, women's gymnastics. We're going to talk about all of that. Friday is a huge day. Baseball
Yep.
is starting. But we do need to make a public service announcement. This
Yes,
episode
we do.
this episode will drop on Tuesday, which
Hmm.
is the 12th, or is it the 11th? No,
The 11th.
the 11th. So you have one more extra day than I thought.
That's right. We just gave you time. I mean, how much more do you want? I mean, really.
Friday's important for a number of reasons. Don't forget, guys, if you have that significant other in your life, it's also Valentine's Day.
That's right. So you mentioned that baseball season, SEC baseball season, is kicking up. There aren't any conference games, but if you live close to one of those games, I mean, one of the SEC team stadium, I can't think of a better Valentine's Day.
Yeah, yeah.
Pick up a couple of LSU tickets if you're in Louisiana, Arkansas tickets if you're in North Louisiana. Just saying, that sounds like a Valentine's Day that can't be beat. I mean, just my 2 cents worth.
Say we're going out. If you live out of town and go to
Hmm.
your favorite SEC school, say I'm taking you on a trip.
There you go.
When you get there, buy the best seats you can get.
That's absolutely.
Splurge at the concession stand. Get her
That's right.
anything that she wants. I'm sure she will be so overwhelmed by that romantic gesture. Your relationship will just ascend to levels that you only dreamed of.
There is nothing that says romance like a ballpark hot dog with extra toppings. I'm just saying. I don't know what more you could do. Maybe we should stick to sports and not relationship advice. But anyway,
And that's why we don't do that on this podcast.
exactly, because that's the stuff we come up with.
Let's talk a little bit about the little bit of things that we know a little bit about, and that is SEC sports. Let's dive into SEC women's basketball, an update on the current top 25, the SEC teams. Texas at number 3, a huge win over South
Oof,
Carolina,
big
stopping
time.
their, what was it, 59-game regular
Yep.
season win streak. Some
Hmm.
incredible, phenomenal number. What a game that was.
Yes.
Absolutely phenomenal. If you're
Yep.
if you like if you're even a cursory college basketball fan, that game was not to be missed.
And
South
and
Carolina. Oh, go ahead.
I think it's important to distinguish the fact, just because we try to cover both men's and women's, throw that out for just a minute. That was a good basketball game. It wasn't a good women's game or a good men. That was a good basketball game from start to finish. Very enjoyable.
Yeah, Sunday, I loved how they had the lineup of these really great women's games leading up to
Hmm.
the Super Bowl. Uh,
Yeah.
I had no interest in watching all the Super Bowl pregame because these were some phenomenal games that
Yep.
were on the docket. So, and that was one of them. Texas and South Carolina. South Carolina drops to number 4. LSU, following a big win over Tennessee at home, moves back up into the top 5. Kentucky
Yep.
at 8. Tennessee, off that loss to LSU, falls to 15. But earlier in the week, Tennessee had a
Man.
monumental victory, defeating Connecticut in
Yep.
Knoxville, a huge win for that program and for Coach Caldwell as she continues to steer that program, uh, get that back to where the level that they're used to being at.
And of course, all of the SEC was excited, just strictly because you hate to see, Coach Gino take that L. Nobody in the SEC wanted to see that, but it was fun
Yeah.
to watch.
It begs a question. We talk about this in other sports, Darren. Connecticut's a strong program. You can't argue
Mhm.
with what they've done historically.
Absolutely,
The conference they play in, as far as women's basketball is concerned, is not that strong.
exactly.
What do you do if you play in a conference where you have seven other teams, or one, two, three, four, five, six, yeah, like the
Yeah,
SEC, that are in the top 25, and you play these teams twice a year? That's a
yeah,
whole game changer, because you can game plan, you can put together a solid team and game plan and win a big game.
yeah,
But can you do it consistently throughout the year in a tough conference? And I think that's where my question is about where UConn is right now. There's no doubt they're a strong team. Paige Beckers is one of the best players in the
hmm,
country. You
absolutely.
can't argue with Gino's record throughout his career. But we've talked about this with other sports and other conferences, and how the SEC is just it's another level. And
Absolutely.
Tennessee beats UConn, and then
Hmm.
they go to Baton Rouge and they lose to LSU,
Yep.
which lost to South Carolina. I mean, and now
Yeah. Yeah.
LSU and Texas will be playing this
Who
coming
lost to
Sunday.
Texas?
And
Exactly.
it's go figure.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The thing you can't argue, no matter if even if you're a fan of another team in another conference, and you want to say, well, SEC is not always the best at everything. Well,
Mhm.
okay, so let's take the argument away from that from just a minute for just a minute. But let's look at UConn's conference. All of those other teams, they have one ramp up. You might have some individual rivalries, but they have one ramp up. They're ramping up to play UConn. UConn ramps up to play nobody in that league. If you're Tennessee, you're ramping up to play South Carolina. You're ramping up this year, even though they've fallen out of the top 25. If you're Tennessee, you're ramping up to play Vanderbilt. You're ramping up to play Texas. And then in the middle of all of that, you play a UConn as well. That is a dramatically different way to have to approach a season versus we're just going to beat everybody in our conference. Obviously, everybody slips up and has an off night, but it's because we slipped up more than because because we played some great team, truthfully. And I think you have to, even if you don't want to get into the conversation of which conference is best, when you look at the difference in those two conferences, I think you have to acknowledge that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, Darren. Well said. And as you pointed out earlier, just a few minutes ago, we don't want to. Women's college basketball is just as good as men's. The
Absolutely.
level of competition is incredible. The coaching, the
Hmm.
play, and SEC is no exception. So this is a great time if you ever thought about watching women's college basketball.
It's a great time.
These great games are going to continue. They're going to
Absolutely.
continue, and then we'll head into the SEC tournament, and then March Madness, of course.
Yep.
So that's the women's side. Speaking of the women's, I do want to point this out. I did not realize this, how good Kim Mulkey has been since she's been at LSU. Her record is 116-15.
Goodness gracious. That's unreal. What's that? That's what, right at 90%? A little over 90%?
Now she's still struggling to get over the South Carolina hump,
Well,
and they have a huge game this week with Texas.
yep.
So right now there's a three-way tie for first place in the SEC among the women's teams. You have Texas, South Carolina, and LSU.
Which goes back to the very thing you just said. And also, even though she hasn't necessarily got over the hump of South Carolina, makes those numbers you just threw out about the job Kim Mulkey's done even more impressive. She's done it in a league that is this tough.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, over on the men's side of things, the SEC is showing up big time as well.
Mm-hmm.
Auburn, despite a loss to Florida at home, held on to that number one ranking. Darren, I kind of thought after Alabama won,
Yeah.
they might jump to number one, especially with
Yep.
Duke losing. The pollsters, though, kept Auburn at 1, Alabama at 2, Florida at 3, Tennessee at 5. Darren, this is the first time in history that one conference has had 4 out of the top 5 teams.
That's incredible.
I would have thought if that was a trivia question, my response would have been like the Big East in the '80s,
Right.
maybe
Yeah, absolutely.
the ACC.
Hmm.
Who would have thought the SEC?
It would be the first to do it.
Followed out of the top 5, A&M at number 8, Kentucky at 15, Ole Miss at 19, Missouri at 21, and Mississippi State at 22. Again, the same thing that we were talking about with the women's side of
Mhm.
things. The men's, there are no easy games unless you're playing the men's LSU team this year, and that's a whole nother story.
Well, here's the crazy thing, though. If you look at the like Massey and Ken Palm, those guys that rank, the entire basketball landscape. They don't just do a top 25. They do 1 to 316 or 331 or whatever it is. If you look at those ranking services, you talked about LSU. LSU men in South Carolina, they both flip flop in those ranking services. One will be the worst in the SEC, and then you go look at the next one, the other one will be. But no matter which one it is, uh, both of those teams in most of those services, and specifically, I look more at Ken Palm. It's Ken Pomeroy's rankings because he has a historically an incredible track record of being pretty on the nose. Even though LSU and South Carolina are significantly below all the other teams in the SEC, when you look at the total rankings, they're still in the top third of all of men's basketball. They're still top 90 or higher. Even though they are the two worst teams in the SEC, they're still top third in the entire NCAA basketball landscape. So that tells you something. I mean, we're talking about teams that don't have a conference win, and they're still seen as better than at least 200 other teams in the country.
Now,
That tells you.
LSU has one
Yes,
conference
I'm
win.
sorry. South Carolina doesn't have a conference win. Sorry.
Yeah, LSU beat Arkansas, just for
That's
the
right.
record.
That's right.
And Arkansas beat Kentucky.
Yeah.
So by that logic, LSU should never mind.
And Arkansas fans, since you brought Arkansas up, Arkansas fans that are screaming about how you should be in the top 25, let's pump the brakes a little bit. You've had a good week. Matter of fact, I'd say you've had a great week, but it's also been one week. Let's pump the brakes just a hair before we get really upset about not being in the top 25. Just throwing it out there.
Good counsel. Speaking of coaches, I mentioned Mulkey's record. Matt McMahon's record for LSU
Mhm.
men since he's been in Baton Rouge. He's in his third season. He's sitting at right at 500, about 43, 42. I may be off by one there, but right at 500. So not nearly the success, even
No,
though he's brought in some top-notch recruits, some really strong transfers, still not achieving that success. And even though you don't think of LSU as a basketball powerhouse, you can't argue with the history,
right. There's been some
particularly during
successful teams.
the Dale Brown era. It's just
Absolutely.
incredible. So South Carolina, I know they're frustrated too after
Hmm.
some success they had last year in the men's program. So it's up and down. But how about these Mississippi schools that are in the top 25? What a great testament, along with what's happening over in College Station.
Absolutely.
Missouri is playing strong. So, and this Saturday, Darren, after Valentine's Day, for you men, if you do right and you treat the woman in your life the way that she deserves on
She
Valentine's
should
Day,
be treated exactly,
she might sit with you and watch an incredible Alabama Auburn game on
which
Saturday.
is going to be absolutely awesome. So fun to watch. Hopefully
Mhm.
so. But you were talking about the Mississippi schools, not just to you, but to all LSU fans. My deepest I was there with you. I was hurting with you. That Ole Miss LSU game was so hard to
Wait,
watch.
I can't I can't hear you, Darren. I can't hear you. I think your microphone's shorting out. Are you there?
So you're saying my microphone is collapsing?
All I
Maybe.
heard was something about Mississippi.
It was hard to watch. I
You were
felt
talking about
for.
your recent trip to Natchez, right?
Yeah, exactly. You nailed it. That's exactly right. My LSU fans, I felt for you. That's all I'm saying. I just that was hard.
Let's leave that in the past and move on.
Exactly.
Let's talk some headlines for this week. Of course, the number one headline is the Super Bowl, a much anticipated matchup between the Kansas City Chiefs going for a three-peat and the Philadelphia Eagles. It did not meet expectations.
In no way.
All Philadelphia from the beginning, a
Yep.
40-22 win, and it actually was not that close. The last touchdown came against Philadelphia's reserves. Kansas City still had their starters in.
Mm-hmm.
They got to Mahomes. This
Big
this
time.
absolutely floored me, Darren. The Eagles did not blitz Mahomes a single time. Think about how strong
Yep.
your front four have to be in order to do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. And it was it was a defensive. All the talk was about offenses, but it was a defensive um, gym, for lack of a better term, to watch on Philadelphia's back. Because I mean, they did. Because the only way you can create the looks and provide the coverage in the back half that they were able to provide when Mahomes did have time is knowing that your front four, front five, front six, whatever your package looks like, knowing that that group is going to be able to create the kind of pressure they did. I mean, that opens the door to everything that happened, and it just moved so smoothly, play after play after play. It was really incredible.
Yeah, they demolished.
Yep.
There's no kind of way to put it. They demolished the Chiefs' offensive line.
Yeah.
It was it wasn't much of a battle all game.
No, not at all.
So some interesting stats from this game. SEC was all over this game. If you want to look at that Philadelphia Eagle defense, SEC, SEC, SEC,
Absolutely.
Georgia, those great defenses we saw a few years ago. We're
Hmm.
watching a lot of those guys play right there on the Eagles defense.
Yep.
6 sacks, I think, from SEC
Hmm.
players in the
Yep.
Super Bowl. 7 touchdowns by SEC players in the Super Bowl. Everywhere you looked, it was SEC. Another
Yep.
testament to the what it's it's the old adage that we are refined by fire. And when you go through a major SEC program and you play an SEC schedule against
Hmm.
the teams that you face, it refines you. And I think we saw that in the Super Bowl.
I think that's very, very well said. I think you can see it. It was on um, a very bright display in that Super Bowl game. Exactly what you were just saying. You could definitely see it.
Another interesting fact, Darren, is the Philadelphia Eagles quarterbacks coach is Doug Nussmeier, the father of Garrett Nussmeier, the LSU quarterback.
Well, there you go.
I say that because the rumor is, as of taping this show, it's not yet been confirmed that Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator for the Eagles, is the front runner to become the next New Orleans Saints head
Right.
coach.
Hmm.
Does Kellen Moore bring Nussmeier with him?
That would be interesting. That
If it
would be
happens, if it happens.
if it happens. And I have seen nothing. I mean, I know we don't cover pro, but I've seen nothing that says to the contrary. I mean, it would have to be, as far as Kellen Moore goes, it would have to be kind of a contractual falling apart. There was a number that the Saints felt like they weren't going to meet or couldn't meet, whatever. I think, because I think the Saints have been off the record pretty clear what they want. And
Yeah.
as of right now, Kellen Moore says he's interested off the record. But I think it would have to be something contractually just being catastrophic for it to not happen at this point.
Now, the Eagles head coach, Nick Sirianni, in post game comments, made a plea to Kellen Moore, let's
Of
run
course.
this back. So, will the emotions of the moment, running it, the idea that maybe we could run it back again, you've got all your pieces returning, or
Mhm.
does Kellen Moore say, I'm ready to take this next challenge, which inheriting this Saints offense is going to be a challenge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And who can blame the Eagles coach? I mean, look at what happens year after year, and even this year in the NFL. I mean, Detroit had an incredible year. They've been stacking years, which is very unusual for the Lions, but they had a great year. And basically, within 24 hours of their game being over, they've lost both coordinators. So, if I'm the Eagles coach, yeah, I'm already making pleas. Come on, man, we can do this again. Just stick with me. Just stick with me. I don't blame him. That's exactly what I'd be doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In other football news, a salary increase. DJ Durkin, the defensive coordinator at Auburn's salary has been increased to 2.5 million, which makes him the second highest paid assistant in the country, only to newly acquired Jim Knowles at Penn State, who left Ohio State to go to the Nittany Lions. Durkin up that high, Darren. What do you think?
I, I think the Auburn administration is terrified of the idea of going backwards in defense and are willing to pay based on what Durkin has accomplished in the past to hold on to him to see if he can do it at Auburn. There's been nothing so far that says, hey, we're going to make this guy the second highest paid assistant in the country. But they're hoping that his past results are a prediction of future results, and they don't want to take a step backwards because when you look at that offense, if the defense takes a step backwards next year, you're probably looking for a new head coach. Wheels are probably going to come off. So they're
Yeah,
trying to avoid that. So they're willing to write the check.
yeah. One more headline before we move on. That is women's gymnastics. Did you know the SEC has 9 teams represented in the top 25 in women's
Wow.
gymnastics?
Wow.
9. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
This Friday, Valentine's Day, if you don't want to go to a baseball game, if you live in Louisiana, you can go down to Baton Rouge
There
because
you go.
LSU is hosting number one ranked Oklahoma in a gymnastics showdown. The PMAC will be full. The energy will be palpable. The place will be rocking
Yeah.
as number one Oklahoma faces off against number two LSU in women's gymnastics. So there you go. Another sport where the top 25 is littered with SEC schools.
And it just means more honestly is a great slogan, but has become a little cliche. But at the same time, you just were talking about women's gymnastics and made legitimately truthful statements, not an over exaggeration. The PMAC will be full and it will be rocking for women's gymnastics. SEC, it just means more. I don't think you can refute that. And then when you take that going back to that conference conversation, so 8 to 10 teams in and out of the top 25 in women's basketball, 8 to 10 teams in and out of the top 25 in men's basketball, ended with at least 7 teams in the top 25 in football, had upwards of 10 teams, depending on which rating you're looking at in the baseball preseason top 25, 9 teams in the women's gymnastics top 25. Okay, rest of the conferences, you can stop arguing now. I think it's becoming futile. Just saying. Just throwing it out there.
Darren rests his case.
Exactly. Thank you.
Speaking of making the case, let's move on to some of our weightier discussions for the episode this week. And the first one is football, college football salaries of coaches versus winning percentage. Darren, you've put together this table here that breaks it all down. And why don't you walk us through kind of what we're looking at, and then let's unpack this a little.
So we've got the left green column is the salary. M is for millions. It's easier to just use an M than have to make room to spell that out.
Mhm.
And they are ranked according to salary. So that means Kirby Smart is the highest paid head coach in the SEC at 13.28 million. Pretty sure I can figure out how to live off of that. Anyway, and then Clark Lee is the lowest rated or lowest paid head coach in the SEC at 3.19 million. Now, out to the right of each column is your the coaches percentage winning percentage at their current school. So, like for instance, with Jeff Levy, he only has 1 year. It was a very unfortunate year, and that ranks for that 17, or that accounts for that
Yeah.
17%. But that being said, the salaries are reflective of the current school, so we only wanted to use the winning percentages at current school. So there's no ranking in those. It's just alongside the where the coach ranks in salary. So ranked from top to bottom in salary, and then the winning percentage of the coach at their current school is out to the right hand side in red.
So if I'm looking at this correctly, Darren, the as far as winning percentage, the four top coaches are Kirby Smart, Brian Kelly, Lane Kiffin, and Josh Heupel.
Yes, that is correct. All of them over 70%, and Kirby Smart being far and above, winner, winner, chicken dinner when it comes to salary and actually winning games at 3.28 million with 85%. So he has the top salary and the top winning percentage in the entire conference.
I'm looking at some less than exciting numbers.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about Mark Stoops at Kentucky.
Yep.
Right now, according to your information, he's making right a little over 9 million a year, and his winning percentage is 48%.
Correct. So he's in the top five of salaries and in the bottom five of winning percentages.
I tell you, if Elon Musk watches this show, Stoops may be out of a job.
I tell you who won't be out of a job, Stoops' agent. There are some coaches going, man, I got to call that guy. If you can win less than anybody else in the conference or be in the bottom five and make more than anybody in the conference in the top five, man, I got to find that. Who's your agent? I got to find that guy's number.
Another one that I found surprising was Hugh Freeze at 44%.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Well, yeah, that's just, I mean, it just has not gone the way anybody envisioned at Auburn. And obviously, in his time at Ole Miss, he was nowhere near the bottom five in winning percentage. He had an incredible, but it just has not. I do find it also interesting when you talk about Hugh Freeze and that 44%, and we just talked about Mark Stoops. Mark Stoops is the only kind of outlier. The other four guys that are the bottom winning percentages also are in the bottom salaries. So you got Sam Pittman at 49%. He's in the bottom four salary. Hugh Freeze that we just talked about at 44. Clark Lee at 33 and Jeff Levy at 17. So four of the five lowest winning percentages also make up the four lowest salaries. So it's interesting how the top doesn't really line up and the bottom salary positions really come closer, much closer to lining up than the top do.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting observation. Elko at 62% in his first year, which
Right.
I think everyone looks at as a success.
Absolutely.
Napier, after taking Florida through that gauntlet last year, yeah, he's at 50%, but it's hard to find a lot of fault with what he did
Absolutely.
this year. Venables is another one,
Yeah.
56%. That's not going to fly long term with OU fans.
No. No, Venables really stands out. You're at 56%, and you're getting paid more than $8 million a year. Oklahoma fans, well, just like we talked about it, even he knows that, and he's going to call his own plays on defense. He knows just how ridiculous these numbers are, and Oklahoma fans certainly are aware of it. You mentioned Shane Beamer. Um, we actually started this conversation around Shane Beamer getting his contract extension and his pay raise. Prior to his pay raise, which bumped him up to 8.1 million, he would have been where he is, just barely in the bottom half of winning percentage. Uh, but he would have been right around Hugh Freeze, Sam Pittman. He would have been much lower in salary than his winning percentage is if they had not. So I think he actually now still 57%, 8.1 million. You could probably argue the tenets of that a little bit as far as it being that big of a bump, but it did push him up closer to being aligned close to the same number in those two categories, salary and winning percentage.
Another observation: we have three coaches right at 9 million. Two of them are 71%, but our friend Coach Drinkwitz at Missouri is only at 61%.
Yeah, and I that one stood out to me as well. It makes me wonder, does that have to do with Missouri fans aren't going to like this take, and I say that up front, but it's kind of like if Clark Lee were to all of a sudden start getting bumps, if he had a couple of seasons like this past season, is part of that the administration acknowledging, man, this guy is doing, with the exception of a few standout years, this guy's doing some really incredible things with a program that hadn't done a whole lot. Let's keep this dude around and see what else he can do. I wonder if that plays into that salary a little
Mm,
bit.
mm. Yeah, good point. Good point. One more before we go on. Kalen Bohr at 10 million. We've talked about this past year at Alabama,
Yeah.
not the level that the Crimson Tide fans expect. 69%. I know he just hired a new offensive coordinator. Is
Right.
his friend from his days at Washington.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, before we get into that, Darren, let's take this information and let's go into the next logical step. Is what coaches are on the hot seat? And I think this is a great transition because we've
Yeah.
talked about Venables and Hugh Freeze. We haven't mentioned our friend Sam Pittman yet because we're fans of Sam Pittman.
Absolutely.
Yet looking at how Arkansas this year panned out, they had some bright spots, but probably not as many bright spots as down moments. So
Absolutely.
right here, this is our scorching hot seat, and we got this. Who put this together originally?
It was college. I think it was College Football Insights is the name of the. It's like a ranking service. They have do it a lot on like Instagram and Twitter, but I'm pretty sure it's College Football Insights. That was
I'm not sure I agree with where Kentucky is. When you look at the
agree completely.
salary and look at Mark Stoops' winning percentage, Kentucky's invested a lot into that football
Yep.
program, and Stoops has pushed them to do so in order to
Yep.
get results, and those results have not happened. How is Mark Stoops not on the scorching hot seat?
I think he has to be. That was the first thing that stood out to me when you consider the fact where he is in. He's below 50% in winning percentage. He's in the top five in the conference in pay. He's basically anytime he's interviewed, he's throwing a fit about NIL money and how he needs more of that. He flirted with the A&M job. Most people believe he'd accepted it, and the A&M big money said, "What are you doing?" And so it fell apart. You put all of those things together, I, I'm in total agreement. I don't know how he's not on just the absolute hottest of hot seats. Because, truthfully, he's kind of in the same position as Sam Pittman, a little bit more tenure. But as far as where the program is, he's kind of in the same position as Sam Pittman. But Sam Pittman is beloved by anybody and everybody, Arkansas, even if they don't agree with the record and want more, they absolutely love Sam Pittman. And I don't think you could say that about Mark Stoops right now in Lexington. I don't think they're having, he's not going to. he's not going to walk up to the end of the classroom where his box is on Valentine's Day and it be stuffed in Lexington. I don't think I don't think that's going to
Mhm.
happen for old Coach Stoops this year.
No, no, no. I understand Napier being on the hot seat from Florida.
Yeah,
If they take a step back, he won't survive. If they can
exactly.
progress and build off of last season, uh,
Yeah,
I agree completely with Venables and Freeze being on scorching hot seats. Those programs
absolutely.
have such high expectations.
Yeah,
They're really going to have to step it up. Warm seat. Let's talk about this a little bit. Do you agree with Jeff Levy being on? He's only got 1 year under his belt, and let's face it,
yeah,
there wasn't a lot left in the cupboard in the
yeah.
pantry for Mississippi State. So he lost Van Buren, but he got
Mhm.
Jackson Arnold, I believe, right?
Right. Yeah, right. Exactly.
So reunited with his quarterback. Do you
Mhm.
think Levy is on a warm seat or a hot seat?
I don't think so at all. I think when you look at it, just totally take a from the outside looking in perspective, you see, he came in, he's got a 70% winning percentage. They looked absolutely awful in just about every single game once conference play started. I can see where you can get there, but when you take a step back and look at it from the 1,000 foot view of what the not just the year before, but the couple of years before looked like for that program, the tragic passing of Mike Leach, the handing over to the program, and honestly, I can't even remember his name right now, but the D coordinator who from everybody's perspective, including his, was not ready to be assume that head coach role in an SEC program, but it was the right move at the right time, just within the circumstances. And everybody acknowledged that, gave him a shot. That did not work. Recruiting didn't go well. People were uncertain about everything. And then you move into Jeff Levy being handed the program. So when you look at kind of his 24-month build to him taking over the program, it's really honestly they're honest fans thankfully won anything last year. So I think that removes him from any form of temperature at all. At most he's room temp, if not if not cold, but I would say I'm comfortable with room temp. He's probably sitting on just a room temp seat at this point.
They can't afford to lose like they did to Toledo to another MAC
No,
school, especially a home game.
no.
Look at the other two coaches on the warm seat. We have Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. I think Darren, we both agree that if he has another season like this one, he's
Whew.
gone.
Yep,
He's it's over.
absolutely.
LSU Brian Kelly. I teeter between him being on the warm seat and the hot seat.
Agree.
There will be no margin of error for Brian Kelly this upcoming
No.
season. Not with the transfer haul of players that they got. It's
Yeah.
I mean they put together the best transfer portal class. They've got recruits coming in, strong classes. If they can't get over that hump, I would kind of put Brian Kelly on the hot seat.
I agree. When you look at recruiting class, as you said, transfer class, as you said, fan base expectations, you are not going to have everything that goes on around the LSU program and people go, 8, 9 wins, let's go. Looking forward to next year. It's just not going to happen. There's a bigger expectation within the LSU program. That by itself takes it from warm edging up to the hot seat, and then are those three things. And then when you add the fourth of Brian Kelly saying, we'll see you at the national championship,
Hmm.
you're setting expectations. I mean, to his credit, I'm not saying that in a derogatory manner. If you feel like you're the best, then be about it, talk about it, and do it. I have no issues with that. But you also turn the knob a little bit yourself. You cranked up the tempo in your own seat with statements like that. And so I think that puts him, all of those things combined, definitely put him in a hot seat more so than a warm seat.
Yeah, agreed. Let's look at these cold seat teams. I don't see anything in here that I find
No.
anything to argue about. Lane Kiffin, he will be in Oxford as long as he wants to be in Oxford,
Yep.
unless he just does something insane that no one can overlook, which I don't see that happening. Mike
Agree.
Elko started off at A&M strong. He's got all the resources. I see that program continuing to improve.
Mm-hmm.
Missouri seems content with the job that Drinkwitz is doing.
Absolutely.
South Carolina riding high with Shane Beamer, especially when you got a quarterback like Lenora Sellers.
Exactly.
So if he continues to develop, I think Beamer is, and let's face it, the South Carolina expectations are different than the expectations at Georgia or Alabama or LSU.
Absolutely. Or LSU. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Tennessee, Heupel, think he's pretty ingrained there. Nico's coming back for his sophomore campaign, should be an improved volunteer team. And the job that Clark Lee has done at Vanderbilt, I think he's exceeded expectations. He's got Diego back for another year. The defense at Vanderbilt, as long as Clark Lee there, is always going to be a strong defensive unit.
Absolutely.
So I agree with the cold seat schools here. What about you?
I completely and totally agree. You look across the board at all those coaches. I think your descriptions were very, very accurate. I think they're all. That's a very. That's the right place. That none of them are in any form of danger, as we sit here today.
And that takes us to the ice cold seats. Hey, when Kirby Smart,
exactly.
Steve Sarkisian, I don't see their seats getting warm. They would have to have a total collapse, and those coaches are too good, and their programs are too loaded for them to have that kind of collapse.
Exactly. And when you're Kirby Smart, you're coaching in the SEC, and you've won 85% of your games as a head coach, and half of that 15% in your loss are can be accounted to having to go up against the greatest coach of all time in Saban. In that account, somewhere in that number, it's right at half of those losses are involve Saban or to Saban. And then when you're Sarkisian, you're coming off a national championship. There's nothing about your seat. You are sitting inside a cooler or a walk-in freezer. That's how cold your seat is if you're those two guys.
So when did Texas win the national championship?
Oh, they went to the national championship. You knew what I meant.
No, they didn't go to the national championship. That was
playoffs. Gosh.
Playoffs.
I changed everything. Sarkisian didn't even make it to the national championship game. He's on the hot seat.
You had Texas fans pinching themselves. What did I miss?
What did I miss? What happened?
Hang on.
Making it to the playoffs. That's what I was trying to say.
Darren, I just got a text from Matthew McConaughey.
He loves what I have to say and has sent me a $100 Uber Eats gift card. That's
He said, "This is why you guys have no sponsors for your podcast."
Including Uber Eats.
I feel like we're on the scorching hot seat, Darren.
You could be onto something there.
Good stuff there. Good stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
So help keep us off the scorching hot seat. If you like the show or we made you laugh a time or two, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. That means a lot to us, the like button. Tell others about the show. We like to think we're a little different from the other shows out there. You
Absolutely.
Probably every show's got its flavor. We're just a couple guys that like SEC sports and like to have fun talking about it. And we appreciate you listening to us. New episodes come out usually on Tuesdays, some point during the day.
Right.
Darren is the mastermind behind all of this. So he is doing the editing and he's our production specialist. And he also has a family and a full-time job. So sometimes if you're ever wondering, man, it came out at 6:00 that one Tuesday morning, then I didn't see it till like 11:45 p.m. the next week. That's why.
Tuesday. Yeah.
But we do appreciate you watching and listening. And until the next episode, y'all be sure to take care.
Have a great week. Thank you for making the Brew and Shaver Sports Podcast your go-to sports show. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review our show if you haven't already. Your feedback is important. Let us know what you think about this week's show. Send an email to brewandshavers@gmail.com or text to our text line 318-390-3599. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you again for listening to the Brew and Shaver Sports Podcast. See you next week.